Hey guys, it's your boy Ben Hurst. Ooh. Thanks guys. That's the last time we're doing that, I promise it's the last time. I'm here today with some really inspirational individuals and we're going to jump straight into talking about the state of mind. With so many things we all have to balance between politics, finance and family life, not to mention our mental health during a global pandemic, how do we even handle all of it? So we're going to start with the first question. How is everybody feeling?
Great.
Blessed.
Good?
Could be better.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I definitely was like, 2020 is my year. We're going to do this.
I think
and
we
then
all
it's
were at the beginning.
Oh.
It was all a lie. Guys, it was all a lie.
I think this time's been about adapting for me. I think you can have a plan in your head and think that it's going to look a certain way. And then there's always this kind of spanner that kind of steps in and it's like, how much do you want it? So for me, this time has been about how much do I want to dig in and really put work in to get to what I want to do, really.
Yeah. I'm with you on that one. I feel like for me, I made plans, but I'm very adaptable to my environment, my situation. So yes, I had plans. Yes, they changed, but I kind of rolled with it. And for me, I'm a little bit uncertain about the future, but I think most of the time I am anyway. COVID didn't really make that much of a difference. Right.
I was going to say that word of uncertainty, that's what would resonate with me the most because I'm a student, still in school. Yeah. You're told you do your A-levels, you go through this UCAS process and then go to university and it's like, no, pause, we're not going to do that. We're going to change it all up a layer and just trying to navigate school, sixth form at home and, you know, it's not been the best at all.
Right.
And yeah, just feeling like you're going to go down a certain path, but now potentially that might not happen.
I grew up in Hong Kong and we went through the SARS pandemic.
So did
epidemic.
What?
Me too. No, I'm joking. I didn't. Was it similar or dissimilar to this?
Well, we were, like, school-wise, I just remember back then there's no technology. We got faxed our homework every day.
Oh my God, faxed.
Yeah,
oh my God.
So we got 3 pages of homework every day, but like 3 pages is nothing compared to what you would learn in school. Yeah. But then we just I started year 6 the next year as if nothing happened and we just kind of caught up and then sometimes the year 6 teacher would be like, oh, I guess that's what you missed and then try to add a little bit more, but definitely. I don't know about you, but...
Yeah, but the thing is, like, you're saying that you kind of missed out on sixth form and stuff, whereas I was going into high school. It's not as big a jump.
There's been some talk about like a level of uncertainty. For me, it was like it brought a real focus to my mental health because I just had to sit with myself. What was the impact for you guys on mental health during COVID?
I am a climate activist and last year I sailed across the Atlantic Ocean for 3 months. I lived on a boat. It was mad. And when I was in South America, because I was supposed to go to UN Climate Conference, I spent 3 months basically putting together like a whole climate program for Latin American, Caribbean and Indigenous people of colour. And like the whole point was they were supposed to come across the Atlantic Ocean back on the sailboat and go to the UN Climate Conference.
Right.
And we got so far as Bermuda and then COVID hit. And it's like so much of my lockdown has been navigating what failure means or like what success means.
Right.
I don't know if anyone can relate to that.
To be honest with you, I had 2 sides of lockdown. Yeah. So when lockdown first came in, I'm working from home. I wasn't furloughed, I was working from home. But I thought, freedom. House party was the thing.
Yeah, for like 2 weeks. Everyone was like,
but then I'm thinking, I'm on house party every day with these guys. I'm having fun with them. Let me get a bottle of Captain Morgan's every day. Yeah. So now that is now something that is building in my mental. But I'm not really conscious of it. I'm just going with the flow, enjoying life, enjoying lockdown. Yeah. It's only that from April the 23rd that it just hit me in the face and I was like, what the fuck are you doing? Yeah. Like, be honest with yourself right now. Take accountability. This is some bullshit. Yeah. But if I didn't have that low, it would never have given me the opportunity to correct it. So,
and do you know what's really interesting about that is the coping mechanisms that we create for ourselves, often without even knowing that those things are happening. I know for me, I developed like really early on some like really unhealthy eating patterns where like some days I would eat, some days I wouldn't. Like if I was really hungry, I might go downstairs and cook something. And I had to make a really conscious decision to like change that. I don't know if anybody else had any like good habits or bad habits that they formed during that time.
Yeah, so I used to hate running. So I've had this block in my head since I was in year 7 where my PE teacher was like, yeah, just put your shoes on, we're going to do PE. And it turned out to be cross country.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
I've hated running, 100%. So during this time, like I've joined the 5 a.m. club, So I've decided that part of my habit is that I need to wake up early and have that first hour to myself, going for runs, going for walks, working out, praying, meditating, whatever. And so I feel like if I hadn't done that, I probably would have got lost in the kind of the hype around everything, you know, like, oh my gosh, don't go here, it's this. And then I think because I took that time out in the morning, it really set me off in a really good kind of playing field for the rest of the day. So yeah, I'd say that's probably one of my main habits. During this time, like, it's been so many up and down kind of different feelings. I just think I had to put it into perspective, and that's why I say I'm blessed, because I've been through worse.
Yeah.
And,
on a personal level,
level,
Yeah.
I've been through worse. And if I hadn't gone through those things, like, it wouldn't have allowed me to be prepared for this stage. So, for example, when I was 21, I got stabbed 7 times. And when I went through that, I had to go through it. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, I couldn't stay there. There's no, like, as you said, you kind of sit with yourself and it's like, oh, I'm just going to, you know, and I went through depression and things like that. But I think because I went through that when I was younger, like, when I come through this, I'm like, okay, so you've already learned from this. And I hope that a lot of people will take that from this situation going forward, that, you know, the things that you've overcome through this kind of pandemic, no matter what comes your way, like, look how far you've come, look what you've overcome. So I think that's just been more so my attitude during this.
I think I had an opposite journey to most people, where, like, I was chilled for the first month and a half. I think also because we had gone through a pandemic before, that I was like, I know how to do this, it's fine. My beginning of the lockdown, I actually had COVID, so I was just like, and because I've had...
I'm joking.
4 months ago. But because I've had 15 surgeries, I grew up in hospital, I was like, we know how to do this, like, we're fine. I'm a life coach. I was like, great, I'm never been more grateful for being a life coach, got all the tools I need to handle my mental health. And then about a month and a half, I was like, oh, okay, all my trauma from being in hospital is now coming up, because not only have I had to go through this alone, because I live alone, but also, like, a lot of the similarities between lockdown and being bedridden in a hospital was so similar. And to be honest, a large part of me was really angry, because suddenly everyone was feeling what I'd grown up with. Right. And I was like, wait, so you're all bitching and moaning, and I grew up doing this when I was 10 years old with no complaints, and also no sympathy when I came out of hospital, no conversations about it, and suddenly now you're moaning because you have to wear a mask. Well, I had to live with a tube down my throat for 6 weeks. And as much as, like, I don't like comparing pain or trauma in any way, I had to also acknowledge and validate my own anger around it, being like, you're allowed to be angry, and, like, going back to, like, my 10-year-old being like, you're allowed to be angry. Someone should have validated how you're feeling at the time. Yeah. And that doesn't take away from the fact that, like, everyone's struggling with this, because, of course, when it was new to me, I struggled with it too. But you can have your processes, validate your feelings, and now it's my turn to validate mine.
Yeah. And I think there's something really important about learning that practice of sitting with your emotions and validating them, whatever you're feeling. Do you know what I mean? I know that one of the moments that made me angry during the pandemic, or a constant moment that has and does continue to make me angry, is a lot of the media, which you mentioned, around messages from the government about what we were supposed to be doing and what was happening.
Don't go to work, go to work. Don't take public transport, go to work, don't go to work.
I actually started following this page called Dysonomics. I was watching their social media, and that kind of gave me a little bit more clarity. I had been listening, and, you know, you get the news alerts that pop up on your phone. So they actually give me anxiety when they pop up, because I feel like that's, like, meant to be a warning.
There's an emergency.
I don't know why, but maybe when I read it, it's always something quite heavy, or it's something quite, you know, profound. I don't know. I was just like, do you know what? There's no point in getting myself down. I know that there's a pandemic. I know what safety looks like. They've already given us a few measures that we can put in place. It's just about being responsible for yourself and thinking of other people.
It's really interesting that you've responded that way into COVID, because I think a lot of people have gone through that, where they feel anxiety, like, they hear the news all the time. It's so depressing.
You have to lock it off. Like, you don't need to have access. And I feel like mainly due to the way that my life has been, I've learnt to block certain things out. Sometimes not necessarily positive things, or, you know, whatever, but I think it's important for you to know when enough is enough, and what, like, certain streams of information are doing to you.
It's really interesting, because I haven't been affected by those facts and figures, and like, that's something that really surprises me. But I think one of the things that I kind of dealt with in lockdown was coming to terms with a lot of my mental health conditions, and, like, basically forcing myself to sit down and deal with them, because I more or less just run away from them for so long. And like, I'd acknowledge that they were there, but I didn't actually do anything to get help. And I think this is one of the things, like, some of you have been talking about, like, running and getting fit and like looking after yourself in that regard, and I think that's amazing. And for me, looking after myself doesn't always make me feel great. It's not always pretty. Like, self-care can be really ugly sometimes. And like, getting help for my conditions when I've been burying them for so long has been so painful, but like, I know it's going to be better in the long run. And
it's
like,
a journey,
that's the thing.
isn't it?
Yeah.
As a politics student, your teachers are telling you, watch the news.
Watch the news all the time.
We have this little, like, basically Google Classroom where they're messaging you, and they're like, just stay up to date with the news, watch the news. This is perfect for politics and your content and your essays. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm there sitting absorbing the news. And it took one day where I was like, I deleted my little news app, the Apple News, BBC News. I don't want to hear it. Like, I don't need to know that it's getting worse at this point. And I found it really, it's one of those things, it's like, isolation and quarantine, it's like, it is a very lonely thing, and if you're fortunate enough to have family, that's great, but even then, in your family, it's quite like, you know, isolating, and then you forget that, you know, the whole world is going through it.
Aaliyah, you mentioned for those of us who are lucky enough to live with family or have people that we live with, I know some people have been isolated for 4 months and been completely alone in a house by themselves and not able to go anywhere except to the supermarket. So I'm interested in how, for all of you, that's played out.
I mean, for me, I struggled quite a lot at the beginning of it, simply because like a lot of my symptoms of depression that I've suffered previously before COVID had kicked in. So for example, I have a young son. The first few weeks, I couldn't see him. I'm at home constantly, which is when I was depressed a few years back, I was off from the world. And it was just these things were like, what's going on? Like, it just brought everything back and brought it full circle to then kind of trick your mind, even though you're not feeling depressed as such. You recognize this as your depressed mode. So then it's easy to trick yourself and hide into that. And that's what I found myself doing. And for me, I mean, it was just getting progressively worse.
Because for those of us with mental health conditions, there are triggers, right? So there are patterns of behavior that you can fall into very easily that will then put you back in a place where you're experiencing that thing again. Being isolated might be one of them. I know you were about to...
Because Kieran was saying that, like, I don't know if this is right for you, but like, when you get depressed, the symptom almost of that is to isolate yourself. But it's like with COVID, the symptom comes before the like mental health, so it's almost like it's forcing you to like rethink, am I depressed? Is this like, it kind of mimics, it really does. And like, you know, a lot of my friends have, I mean, they say this, but I know it's not completely like accurate, but they say, oh yeah, I don't really feel that different between COVID and when it wasn't COVID. And like, I know it affects everybody in different ways, but like for me, as soon as I heard it was locked down and as soon as I had to come back from Colombia, I was just like, I'm going to be depressed. And I just know it. And it's like, I don't want to say that I'm like setting myself up for being depressed, because you can kind of channel these sort of psyches, but like, I just knew it. I was like, spending time indoors, not being able to see my friends. I'm like a massively extrovert person. Like, I need to be around people. And so knowing that I'd be spending time indoors, knowing that I finally had to deal with my mental health problems, I was like, great, this is going to be fun. Exactly.
Does anybody have any like positive stories about their experience?
Maybe the second or third week into lockdown, I just had this download. Like, I'm a man of faith in it, so I just had this crazy download, and it was just like, I keep hearing on the news everyone talking about school students and it's going to be affected them in this way, and they're not listening to the lockdown restrictions. And I have this thing as a youth coach. I'm just like, why do we keep talking about young people when they've got voices?
Right.
And so
Speaking for them,
do you see what I'm saying? Like, and so I said, look, let me put this campaign together, and this campaign was called Our Lockdown, and basically it was like 20 to 30 second videos of young people from, you know, across London with different perspectives, and we asked them like 7 questions, which is like, you know, what made you smile during lockdown? What one thing would you like to see after you finish lockdown? And we put them alongside celebrities and role models and just basically pushed it out through social media. And actually Aaliyah did one of our videos.
And I was literally speaking to my friend about it yesterday, and I was saying to her, like, those videos it was one, to watch it, the best uplifting thing ever, because you're realizing, okay, there's other people, there's celebrities, people who, you know, are on social media all the time and like presenting themselves to be a certain way, who are telling you it's hard, and then they're giving you tips. But then you've also got young people like myself who then had the platform to share that, and it was amazing. And I really, really I just loved watching it. Like, I loved watching it, and I know that so many other people benefited so much from it. Again, that idea of just realising we're all going through the same thing. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, whether you're a student or an adult, like we're going through the same thing. And on the note of like positive experiences, I would say technology is almost being amazing because, again, you're able to FaceTime your nan because she's alone and she's at home by herself. But then at the same time, with me campaigning and stuff like that, I'm now on Zoom calls with hundreds of young people across the country where I would never have been able to connect to them any other way. So it's like now I've made friends in Southampton. I've never met you. We don't know each other. So the day that we reunite, it's going to be amazing.
I just want to add to that as well about Zoom. Like, I think during this time, like so many people have been available.
100%.
Like the amount of CEOs that I've had conversations with about different opportunities or again like celebrities and stuff that you can get into these videos that normally they're not available. And
I really admire your work ethic of like being solution focused, because that's something like even though the project that I was working on ended, we moved online, we adapted, and like it's hard. And so like, you know, just being able to communicate with them was so wholesome and lovely. And like you're talking about how you have friends in different places, like we're working across 5 different time zones, talking to people all over the world. And like, at least I can speak from the climate youth perspective, it's become so much stronger and way more inclusive. And like, I know that Black Lives Matter is something that has to be like the absolute like foundations of every single justice fight that we do. And one of the things that has come from that is like climate justice movements now, and young people are way more inclusive. They fight for racial justice as a precursor to environmental justice. The youth movement, the global climate youth movement in the media has always been pioneered by young white people, and that needs to change. And it's not those people who are going to be hit the hardest.
And I think that there's a really important point in there about identities that are often hit the hardest by negative things that happen in these kinds of situations. So we've seen in the news recently that apparently BAME communities are not taking COVID seriously, which is very contentious. But I'm interested in, particularly Chloe, like in your experience as a black woman, has that, do you feel like that's impacted you differently in this period of time?
I think, like you said, there's certain people that know how to manage their emotions, and it's not to say that I'm really good at managing it, but I can see trigger signs. I've noticed like what things will set me off, or you know, I can see when, like I know when my like energy levels are falling, and I know when it's getting a little bit harder to get out of bed. Those kind of things. That's how I'm just like very aware of myself. So. You know, there was pressures to like for me get up and get on the phone. I actually found like communication was amazing, but where I run a business as well, it was overload. So, and my business is online, so I always had to be online. So I had to tell my friends like, I'm not gonna answer your calls today. Like if there's a group chat, I'm gonna message one of them and be like, I swear to God, if you guys ring me one more time.
No, God, please, no.
But it works for me. Like maybe one day of like going out, or one day of like, I don't know, doing like some mad walk, and then I'm good for like the next few days. So I just manage it personally for me.
And another demographic of people that are obviously affected really harshly by this pandemic are working class people. I know that it's a lot harder for people who don't necessarily have access to all of the things that they might need. I'm interested to know if anybody's got an opinion on that.
For working class people, it's a thing where amongst my group of friends, it's like, as you said earlier, it's always trying to stay busy. It's always trying to avoid being at home. That is something that is just innate in us, because we want to try and get out of being working class eventually. So this has kind of thrown you straight into the house, which for me is going to have an impact on the opportunities that you now have. And it was a big struggle for myself, and I know my friends suffered greatly with it in the sense where they just didn't know what to do with themselves. They've got so much more time and less resources. Some are being furloughed, some are being cut off their job. Some are literally sitting there and they can't do anything. They some of them are sitting there thinking, how am I even paying rent this month? I hope my landlord lets me off. I see people coming away damaged from this to a level where it's like, they're not going to be the same person.
Class, I think, for me, becomes very much apparent. It has become very much apparent within the pandemic. Now you know the students that don't have a laptop, can't log into the lesson, those that, you know, might live in a flat that's overcrowded, so then that means that they don't have a quiet place to do their work, but you're doing A-level, so you need to have a quiet place. And then also, like you said, someone might have a house with a garden, so they can go out, you know, to the garden. I live in a flat and have another brother, although maybe it's not as crowded, there's definitely times where, you know, you're walking on top of each other a little bit. I'm like screaming, I need a room for Zoom. And I read something online, and it was just saying how people who are more well off have about a week and a half plus more learning than someone who doesn't. And that just shows you, when we go back to school, the difference between perhaps someone that hasn't had that and someone that has. And it's like, we're definitely going to suffer, and you're going to see it.
And in terms of community support, right? So like in terms of being individuals in lockdown and finding support from other people in different places, I know that one of those spaces for a lot of people is their faith community. I don't know who on the table is a part of a faith community, or who on the table like goes to a church or any other place of worship. And I'm interested in how that's translated, like when you can no longer leave your house and go to those places. Has it been easy to like keep up those kind of relationships?
Yeah, like I think like I go to church, and I think being in WhatsApp groups has been really cool.
Right.
But also, like, I don't see church as a building. I also know that because of the position that I play within my community and my network, that sometimes people are calling me to really feel uplifted. I can't just constantly like pour out to other people and not have it given back to me. So I've had to try and find that balance, because otherwise people will constantly call you and, oh, like, how you doing? You're right. And it's cool, I'll do it, but I also need to be uplifted and filled as well.
For me, it's obviously been hard. I agree with Amani in terms of, for me, church isn't just the building. So I had a youth church group on a Wednesday, and straight away we moved on to Zoom.
Yeah.
And again, it's that idea of community. So even if we don't have that kind of official setup, we're still talking and we're still checking in on each other. And it's, in terms of faith, for me, it's been hard because it's very much, you have to be independent. Like, you can't rely on anybody else. No one's watching you. A lot of times, sometimes I think faith can be, you have to show off that you're praying and that you're going to church, and you have to snap this and Instagram that. It's actually like, now I love the fact that you're just doing it for yourself, and that's the only person it should be for.
We've had a really broad conversation. We've touched on a bunch of different topics. One thing that I think would be really cool is if we could leave people with like a kind of survival guide for looking after your mental health during a pandemic, looking after your mental health during lockdown.
It sounds cliche, but I would say physical activity, some form of physical activity, keeping a tidy room, simple things that you can just count as an achievement for that day to then build on.
Mine is slightly more abstract, but like Audre Lorde says that self-care is not self-indulgence, it's an act of political warfare. And like, remember that you are valid in whatever struggle you have to take care of yourself first, because that is a political fight.
I completely agree with that. I was just going to say, as an activist and a campaigner, maybe not to put the world's issues on your shoulders, and to actually remember the bigger picture of like, if we all come together and take individual responsibility, that we can actually achieve and like, you know, that better world that we want. So post-lockdown, whatever that vision is, like if we all do our part, then we can actually do it, rather than you feeling like you have this responsibility to like, you know, add that policy and change the world. So yeah, definitely remember that individuals can come together and do it collectively.
And there's definitely this idea that like joy and celebration of joy are like radical acts. Do you know what I mean? Particularly when you're somebody who spends all of your time doing that work. Like, to just take a minute to pause and celebrate is like a really important thing to do.
I'm a really spiritual person, so one thing that really helped me was my belief that I'm in the right place at the right time at all times. And so I just kept telling myself that over the pandemic.
I love that. Journal. Be present. Write down how you're feeling. Don't be afraid to kind of look yourself in the mirror and say, I'm not okay today, and write it down, and keep a track of how far you've come based on that first initial entry, and just keep writing. That's what I'd say.
So I'd definitely say like put in some boundaries, or learn to figure out what your boundaries are and how to communicate them effectively.
Guys, thank you so much for participating. Thank you for sharing those thoughts and giving those tips as well. I think that stuff is really, really important. Come to the end of the episode. If you're watching at home, one thing that I'd like to say to you is be kind to yourself. Make sure you take some time to rest, take some time to relax if you can, and be gentle. Like, don't be too hard on yourself, because it's a hard situation. Like we said, we're all experiencing it at the same time. Thank you for tuning in. If you like the video, make sure you subscribe for more content, and we'll see you again soon.